Hi, my name is Matt and today I'm going to be taking a look at the iPhone 5C. This phone was released in 2013 and was essentially an iPhone 5 repackaged in a nice plastic colourful body. The iPhone 5C was the first iPhone to come in a wide range of bright colours, and it came in white, blue, green, yellow and pink. I don't think that the iPhone 5C was the biggest commercial success. It was marketed as a budget iPhone, however it still had quite a high price tag of £469 on launch. And think this was in 2013, like, that's a lot of money for a budget phone in 2013, long before the days of £1,000 iPhones. Especially since it kind of just looks like a kid's toy and it still costs 469 quid on launch. That being said, at the time that this came out, a lot of my friends were getting their first iPhones, and pretty much everyone that I knew at school had an iPhone 5C, and the colours were definitely a hit with teenagers. I think another really cool selling point of the 5C was how durable it was. So the people that I knew with iPhone 5Cs didn't really take care of them because they didn't need to. They threw it about and they were all scratched up and dented, but they always worked. And I think that was like a really good idea by Apple, making a durable phone targeted at younger people. I personally never owned an iPhone 5C up until this one, and I actually never rated the design. At the time it was kind of nicknamed iPhone 5 cheap because it looked a little bit cheaper, but I must say when you're actually holding it, it doesn't feel cheap at all. It still feels like a really good phone, and the design has definitely grown on me. Like, I really do think this is now one of my favourite iPhone designs. I picked this iPhone 5C up from eBay for £30, and rather weirdly it's just been refurbished, so it's got a brand new plastic housing and battery, so it looks like a brand new iPhone 5C, so I thought it'd be interesting to sort of see how this iPhone holds up in 2021. So starting with design, the guy who I bought this from has actually refurbished this iPhone, so it is like new. The colourful casings I think photograph a little bit weirdly and look kind of cheap, but when you're actually holding it, it definitely doesn't feel like a cheap phone. I remember holding old plastic Android phones and the plastic feeling a little bit hollow and flimsy, but this isn't a flimsy phone at all, and the plastic feels very expensive. It's a plastic that's aged very well, and I think in all the different colour variations, it's a design that I've grown to become very fond of. On the front of the phone there is a 4-inch display with a 326 pixels per inch pixel density. The screen is decent and holds up well in 2021. It gets plenty bright and it looks sharp enough. I think the screen is one of the things that's aged well apart from the size. It feels very small compared to any newer iPhone, and I found it quite difficult to type on and just use because of this small size. The buttons on the side feel super clicky and really good quality, and also at the bottom you can find your 3.5mm headphone port. Moving on to performance. As I mentioned earlier, the iPhone 5C is a repackaged iPhone 5, and therefore it is running on the A6 processor with 1GB of RAM. So due to this phone being a repackaged iPhone 5, it actually only received 3 versions of iOS. The iPhone 5C was sold with iOS 7 and received updates up until iOS 10. 3 years of software updates is decent, but most iPhones kind of get a lot more than that, and the iPhone 5S, which was released alongside the iPhone 5C, actually received 5 years worth of software updates. Performance is also a mixed bag. iOS 10 looks and feels very modern, and the icons are fairly similar to iOS 14, and I think iOS 10 holds up fairly well. I was pleasantly surprised by how well the default apps worked. Simple things such as using iMessage, photos, calendar, etc. runs very smoothly, and I think if all you wanted from an iPhone were these default apps, then an iPhone 5C isn't even a bad choice, as actually they do all work. So apps take a little longer to load compared to a new iPhone, but this really isn't too much of a problem and doesn't feel that slow. There's a slight delay when typing between touching the screen and the characters appearing on the screen. Again, it's not too bad. As I mentioned earlier, the display is small and difficult to type on. Many applications are no longer supported on this iPhone. For example, YouTube requires iOS 11 or newer to be downloaded. But the bare necessities such as WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger and Amazon, they do work fine on this phone. As expected, the real signs of age show when you try to do anything more than texting or making phone calls. The very few games that are available on iOS 10 are laggy and slow. I think you'll find them more frustrating than fun trying to play games on this iPhone. Safari is fairly slow and just about acceptable. But again, you're probably going to find it a little bit more frustrating using it than it is fun. However, you can watch YouTube on Safari and it kind of just about works. So if you want this phone for literally the necessities of texting, iMessage, note-taking and music playing, then it still holds up great at doing all of those. But when you want to take it a step further and do anything a little bit more advanced, then this iPhone really does struggle and you'll definitely find yourself wanting to throw it out the window. So moving on to camera. The main camera is an 8 megapixel camera that was capable of shooting 1080p video. So I've been taking this camera out and taking a few photos, and as expected, they're not amazing, they're not too terrible. If you're in a challenging lighting scenario such as this photo, it really does struggle because the sky is completely just a white mess in this photo. So the photos on this phone don't look too terrible. Where it really shines is video. I used to film a whole ton on my iPhone 5. Apple just do video really quite well, and this iPhone 5C is pretty decent for video, especially when you think it's an 8-year-old phone. The front-facing camera is a 1.2 megapixel camera capable of shooting 720p video. I took a few selfies on this camera in my kitchen, and I must say I was pleasantly surprised by the quality of the selfies. I was in a really brightly lit room, so it was kind of easy shooting conditions, but I did think that the selfies on this camera looked fairly decent. And the 720p video also looks kind of acceptable as well, especially if you're just doing something like FaceTime. So this is just a test of the front-facing camera. I'd say that this is pretty optimum conditions right now because I've just got a massive window in front of me, so I'm in a very well lit room. But if I go like that, this is probably a lot more difficult for the camera to pick me up or the outside. As you can tell, everything behind me is just completely blown out and you can barely see myself. But as I go back into the light, you can sort of see me again and everything. It looks, you know what, on this screen right now, it doesn't look too bad. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like on my laptop. So finally, I want to talk about the battery life. So as I mentioned, this phone that I bought had been refurbished, and that even included a brand new battery being fitted. So due to this being a new battery, the battery life is decent. The phone isn't very usable, so you can't use it for like 5 hours worth of screen on time a day, and therefore the battery life will comfortably get you through a day of usage and ages on standby. However, most iPhone 5Cs on the market are going to have a battery between 5 and 8 years old and are going to have degraded a lot, and therefore you can expect really poor performance from the battery. If you're going to buy this, I don't really recommend that you do. Probably get one with a new battery or buy it with the intention of replacing the battery. So to conclude, I was fairly impressed by how well iOS 10 and the iPhone 5C held up. For the very basics, such as iMessage and phone calls, this kind of doesn't feel like an 8-year-old phone, but as soon as you start to push it, you can definitely tell its age, and many apps are just no longer supported at all. I'm a really huge fan of this design language and I've grown to love it, and I think it might be my favourite iPhone design ever. I think I will go as far to say that now. It is one of my favourite, if not my favourite iPhone design now. I do think it's a bit of a shame that this is just a repackaged iPhone 5, especially when you consider that this only received 3 years worth of software updates when most iPhones receive considerably longer than that, especially when you think that the iPhone 5S was released at the same time as the 5C and received 5 years worth of software support. I do hope that this video was interesting and enjoyable. I will be uploading plenty of other tech themed stuff. My next video is going to be like tips and tricks when buying a used iPhone, so subscribe if you're interested for that. Catch you all again. Thank you for watching.